Mesachas Bava Kamma Daf Kuf Tes Zayin refers back to our most recent Mishnah and analyzes the two cases with two halachos each where we have there. The Mishnah talked about two cases of somebody who's willing to lose his property in order to save someone else's property. Two cases where somebody who pours out his wine in order to use the jug to save someone else's more expensive honey, and someone who gives up on saving his donkey from the river in order to save someone else's because the other person's was worth more. In both cases, the person wants the person that he helped to pay for his loss. And the Mishnah says it depends on what he says. If he doesn't specify you're going to pay for my loss, he only gets paid like a worker. If he says I'm going to pour out my wine, or I'm going to give up my donkey in order to save yours, then he will get paid for the loss, and he'll have to pay the person whose honey and donkey was saved. He'll have to pay him fully for the materials that he lost, for the wine that he lost, and for the donkey that he lost. So the Gemara begins now by asking, why should he have to pay for that? He should be able to say Mishata Ani Vach, is a concept which we find in Shas, that if somebody's in a stuck situation, he's allowed to promise to pay a higher price and then say, I was just pushing you off, or I was just fooling you. And the reason is because he shouldn't be taken advantage of because of the troubling situation that he was in. The Gemara quotes a brayso that brings us halacha, somebody who was fleeing from a prison, and he comes to the river, and there was a ship that was willing to cross the river for him. So he can say to the person who's in charge of the ship, take a dinar, which is way overpriced, and cross me over the river. And when he gets to the other side, he only needs to pay the regular fare. He doesn't have to pay this higher inflated price of a dinar. Because he could say, Mashat ani bach. So here also let him say, I promised to pay you for your wine or for your donkey, but I only have to pay you like a worker. You get your salary like a worker. You don't get this high inflated price. So the Gemara's answer is because here there's a explicit loss. Here you can see the loss that happened. And the Gemara shows this by going back to the brayso that was just brought and saying there's a seif in the brayso. The seif there, instead of saying take a dinar and cross me, he says take this dinar as your schar. And there he does have to pay the full amount, the full dinar, and he can't say Mashat ani bach. So Gemara says, what's the difference? The difference is that in the second case is a person who was the owner of the ship was not a ferry, it was a fishing boat, and by crossing this person he loses out on his fishing catch for that time. So since he's giving up fish, he's saying take this in your schar. He's saying, I'm going to pay you for the fish that you lose. And that's the brayso that's clearly saying that if he's suffering a loss because of you, you do have to pay the loss. If you said that you would. You can't say Mashat ani bach on that. So that would be comparable to our case here where he's losing the wine or he's losing the donkey in the same manner as that. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, why do we need both cases, the case of the wine and the case of the donkeys? So the Gemara says that the difference between the two is that in the case of the wine, he's pouring out his wine at biyadayim. He's literally destroying his wine in order to save, this case, honey. So it's much more likely that you would need to pay for that the person who's having his honey saved would need to pay for that. However, in the case of the donkey, where he's not actually destroying the donkey to save this man, he's just not saving it, but it's the river that swept it away, so you would think maybe it's less likely that you have to pay. So therefore you have a chiddush both ways. In the first halacha, where if he doesn't make that condition that you're going to need to pay for it, and you don't therefore have to pay for it, so it's more of a chiddush. In the case of the wine that you don't have to pay for, there you have to mention that case. And in the second halacha, where if you do specify, you do have to pay, it's more of a chiddush that even in the case of the donkeys, where the loss is memela because it was swept away by the river, then you actually do have to pay the full amount. So there you have to say the extra chiddush, you have to say that case also to show even in that case where the loss is memela, you still need to pay the full amount. Now the Gemara brings a few halachas benegay to this. Gemara says, there's a question was asked by Rav Kahana from Rav. What happened in the case of the donkeys if the person went down to save the donkey, and it turns out that the other donkey is that his own donkey survived on his own. So he had made him promise, I'm going to save your donkey on the condition you pay for mine, and then his donkey survives on its own. That is his own donkey, the donkey that belongs to the man who was saving the other person's donkey. So do you say that this donkey is now hefker? He had been lost, and he's been hefker, and therefore the fact that he got the donkey now doesn't mean that it patters the other person from paying for the donkey. The person agreed to pay for the donkey to have his own donkey saved. Now that the first donkey was saved as well, that's a gift from Shemayim to the first person, and it doesn't patter the other guy. Or do you say, no, he got back his donkey, so the other person doesn't need it to pay for it? So the Gemara says that the psak was that from Shemayim they had Rachmanas on him, and therefore he got a free gift from Shemayim, but the other person still has to pay for it. The Gemara says a similar thing happened with Rav Safra. He was traveling in a caravan through the wilderness, and they had livestock with them. There was a lion that was accompanying them, and it was traveling along with him. This lion served a function of keeping all the other animals away so that they wouldn't attack the livestock that they had. However, the lion required his food as well. So every evening, the people of the caravan would send a donkey out to feed the lion, and then he got his food and he served as a guard for them so that the other animals wouldn't attack. So the Gemara says that they took turns, each one sent out one of his animals each night. When it came to Rav Safra's turn, he sent a donkey to the lion, but the lion decided not to eat the donkey. So the donkey was now Hefker. Rav Safra went and he quickly ran and he was Zeicha in his donkey back from Hefker, because since he had given it to the lion, it became Hefker. But this was a special matana minashmayim for him, but it was still Hefker. So similar in our case, the donkey that came out of the river that we would have expected to be gone was also a matana from Hashemayim, and it had been Hefker. It says, said Rav Acha mi difti to Ravina, why does he have to be Zeichet? He was mafkaret, but he wasn't mafkaret to everybody, to other people. It was mafker to the lion. Therefore, it shouldn't be considered hefker. The Gemara says, you're right, it was not hefker. It was not really fully hefker. It was mafker to the lion. He only did extra in order that people shouldn't have a claim against him. Next Shaila Gemara asks, this is Rav from Rabbi again, what if he went down to save it and did not succeed? He said, you're going to pay me for my donkey and I'm going to save yours. He went down and he didn't manage to save the donkey. But now he lost both donkeys. Does the other person still have to pay for his donkey? So he said, what kind of Shaila is this? He definitely doesn't get paid for the donkey. He didn't save any donkey. And therefore he only gets his wage as a salaried worker. So Mara says, we have a kasha on this. If somebody hires a worker to bring in cabbage and dormaskinin, which are prunes or some other some other fruit or vegetable that people use for refuah, and he's hired to bring them in for a sick individual. He went and he found them, and he brought them, but the person that he brought it for, either he no longer needed it, either because he died or he was cured, so he gets paid the full salary. So if he gets a salary there, even though his work was now useless, so this person also should get a salary, even though his work didn't serve the purpose that it was meant to serve. So Gemara says, how do you compare that? In that case, he did his job. Here, he didn't do the job. The job was to save the donkey, and he didn't. The Gemara now goes into a little bit of the halachas of caravans and ships traveling together. So caravans, the Gemara says, if they're traveling together through the midbar, they're attacked by a troop to rob them, and they have to hire someone to defend them, or they appease the troop with money. How do they divide the money up? Who needs to take how much of a loss? So it goes by how much money they had. If the ones who had more possessions, they need to take a greater percentage of the loss. It doesn't go by how many people they had in their party, because the threat of this troop is only on the money, not on the people. However, if they had to hire a guide to guide them through the midbar, then they do pay for the amount of money that they had as well as the amount of money that they had. You take both factors into account in determining how much of a share each one owes. And because if they would get lost, it would be a sakanas nefashos, not only a sakana to lose the money that they had. Now, if you have a group of donkey drivers that are traveling together, each one is responsible for a donkey. If one of them loses his donkey, then if he lost it b'pshia, obviously you don't want to give him another one, but if he lost it b'inus, then you give him another one to watch, so that he is equally watching a donkey and taking a share of it together with everyone else, and he's accepting equal responsibility. Now, if he says, give me another one and I'm going to watch it, you don't listen to him. Gemara says, that's pashut. Why would I think that? So Gemara says, because it's referring to where he has another donkey of his own, and you may think therefore he can watch them. Kamashman, adding extra responsibilities is a bigger problem. Rashi learns here in the Zagah that he says, I don't want to watch one. We tell him you have to watch it. And the chiddush is that even though he has another one of his own, he says, I can't watch two. We say to him, no, you'll watch two, and you'll be more ma'aseh nefesh to watch them, which is what we want here. Now, the Bryce also adds that you don't change from the minig. So if the minig of the drivers is however you divide it up by nefashos or by money, then they divide up the responsibility that way as well. Now the Gemara quotes another Bryce that says the same halachas about ships. So it says that your ships are traveling through the sea together. We'll see soon through a river as well, and they got approached by a tidal wave to drown it, and therefore they had to throw things into the water. How do you divide up the loss? So the loss is divided up by weight, by how much weight each one of them had, and not by how much value or how much money each one of them had. The ship drivers can make a condition between them that anybody who loses a ship should take responsibility for someone else's ship. They should each have a ship and be Moser Nefesh on it. Of course, if it was lost by Pshi, you're not going to do that. If it was lost by Inus, then you are going to do that. If, however, he went to a place where ships aren't supposed to go, then you don't give him another one. Gemara says Pshita. Why would you give him one if he drove it to a place it's not supposed to be and that's why he lost it? And my answer is, no, we're talking about a river, and during Nisan, when the rivers are full of snowmelt, the river is very deep, ships can be near the shore, because it's deep, you don't have to worry about hitting the bottom. However, during Tishrei, when the rivers are pretty low, then you go out into the middle. This guy went out into the middle during Nisan, so it wasn't a terrible place to go. It was a place where you do go during Tishrei. However, he went during Nisan, and therefore you may think that maybe it's okay, but Kamashma, no, we don't give him any more ships to drive. The Gemara now brings another brisa. Brisa says, if you had a caravan that was traveling through the midbar, and again a troop came and attacked them, and one of them stood up and saved the money from everybody. So now, who gets the money? So there's two halachas. If he didn't say anything, then everybody shares it equally. If he said, I'm saving it for myself, then he gets to keep it all for himself. So the Gemara says, well, it should depend on what he says. Were the other people able to save it, and therefore they weren't meyayish? Were they not able to save it, and therefore they were meyayish? Either way, it shouldn't make a difference what he says. If they were able to save it, they're meyayish. It should belong to him, even if he didn't say anything. And if they weren't able to say, and if they were able to save it, even if he says they weren't meyayish, who cares what he says? And therefore, it should belong to them and not to him. So the Gemara gives three answers. The Gemara first brings Bava Kamma, who says that we're talking about with their partners. He's a partner with them. And what he's saying is that I want to divide it with you. I don't want to stay partners anymore. I want us to each to take our chelik. And ordinarily, he may not be able to force a split or force to stay together. But here, by him saving it, he has a right to force a split or force staying together. Rava answers, we're talking about where he was a worker for the other people there. He's a worker for the owner of the caravan. And the halacha is that he can retract being a worker at any point. He can pull out of the arrangement. Now, if he doesn't say anything, so he stays a worker and he's working for them, when he saves it for them, and therefore they each divide it evenly. If, however, he says that I'm saving it for myself, he's canceling his job for them, he's not working for them, and now it's hefker, because he's the only one who can save it, they can't save it, and therefore it belongs to him and not to anyone else. The reason he's allowed to cancel, of course, is because it says Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim v'lo avadim la'avadim. He's not their eved, and therefore he can pull whenever he wants. So the third answer is Rav Ashi. He says that they could save al yidei hatchak. When he says I'm going to save for myself, if they don't say anything, then they're showing that they're maskim because they are meyayish and they can't save on their own. If they're not willing to save on their own, if, however, he doesn't say anything, then you have no evidence of that, and therefore you have to assume that they were willing to save it on their own, and it doesn't belong all to him. This concludes the Gemara. Now we get to our next Mishnah. Mishnah discusses where Shimon steals a field from Reuven, and then he loses it himself to a marauding troop that are stealing property. So now what? So he can't return it because he lost it himself. So the Mishnah says it depends if they stole it from him because he's a thief, or if they are just marching around the whole area stealing from everybody. It's what we call a makas medina. So if it's a makas medina, then it's not his responsibility. He could say, I'm giving you your field back, you would have lost it just as much as I did, I'm a potter from it. If, however, it's his own responsibility because of who he was, then he still owes them another field. If he can't get this one back, he has to give them a different field. The Gemara begins by first analyzing the word that's used to describe these anasim, these marauders. So our Mishnah says masikin. The Gemara quotes Rav Nachman Yitzchak, who says that there's one version that says masikin like us. There's a different version that has matzikin with a tzadi. So Gemara says both of them could fit, both of them could make sense. Matzikin would be from the word b'matzah uv'matzaik, referring to oppression, and what it says masikin is from the pasuk Yirish Hatzlatzal, referring to a type of grasshopper that destroys things, and the targum of that is Yachsinina Saka'a Lashon Sikin Masikin, that they destroy the field. Now, the Gemara wants to know, what is the chiddush of the Seifa, where we say that if it was taken because he's a thief, then he needs to give them a new field. So what it says, how do you know that it was taken because he's a thief? If it's referring to where they took only his land and not anyone else's land, so obviously you see that from the Resha. The Resha said if it's a Makas Medina, then he doesn't need to pay. Obviously, if it's only him, he needs to pay. So we're saying that the Chiddush here is where he showed them the land to be taken. That's the king wanted to take the land away. We were looking for land to take, or there was Akam that was looking for land to take, and he pointed them towards this land, and he said, take that land, and he took that land along with the other lands that he was taking. The Gemara brings an incident. It was a man who showed a field of wheat from the home of the Reish Galusa to be taken, and he came before Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman was mechayev him to pay for it. So Rav Yosef was sitting behind Rav Huna Bar Chia, and Rav Huna Bar Chia was sitting in front of Rav Nachman, and said Rav Huna Bar Chia to Rav Nachman, is this a din or a knas? This is halacha he has to pay, or is it a penalty that we're penalizing him? We said, no, it comes from our Mishnah that says that if it's because of the thief, he has to give him another field. And we said that if he shows him, so there you see that this halacha of showing them the field to take is a din, not a knas. So after he left, Rav Yosef asked Rav Huna Bar Chia, what's the difference if it's a din or it's a knas? What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is, can you learn from it to other situations? If it's a din, you can apply it to other circumstances. If it's a special knas, you can't apply this to other circumstances. Now the Gemara will question whether that's true, but that's for the next stuff.